It is Monday, October 7th, and I want to bring the Oconee County Planning Commission meeting to order. First order of business is our invocation. Could I get you to?
Yes, sir. Pray with me if you will, everyone. Heavenly Father, we ask that you please watch over this committee and the planning staff and guide us to wise and safety-conscious decisions in support of the public. And we also ask that you watch over the county law enforcement, first responders, and other county workers as they perform their duties, that they may return home safely to their families after every shift, particularly right now after the storm. We ask that you please watch over the county and state leaders as they work to make the county a better place to live each day. And finally, we ask that you please watch over all the families that were impacted by the storm and bring them through safely. And in North Carolina, we pray for those families, and hopefully they'll find all their loved ones. In his name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Turn it down. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. If everybody's had a chance to review the minutes from last week, I need approval of those minutes. Is there a motion to approve, anyone?
So approved. Motion.
Second?
I'll second.
Are there any changes that we need to discuss? If not, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Yeah.
All right. Were there any public comments for non-agenda items? All right. Do we have any commissioner member comments? Yes, sir.
I'd like to say to the camera that I'm disappointed that there's not one person here in the audience. I know you guys have got important things to do, but you need to come to the planning commission and discuss the future of this county with us.
Excellent. Any other commissioner member non-agenda item comments or commissioner comments?
I got something to say based on what I've observed after the storm is people of this county are really out to help each other. And I know we got blocked in by a big oak tree that went over. We couldn't get out of our neighborhood. And if it hadn't been for a young man with a skid steer and some chainsaws, and he brought his crew out, we'd have been stuck there for quite a while. But he got right to it, and he wasn't getting paid to do it. He was just doing it out of the kindness of his heart. And I know there are many, many examples of that same thing all across our county. And I think we should be proud of the people of our county and how we stick together and support each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd like to say that what happened in North Carolina was unimaginable, and even here, some of the devastation we had. I really just, I've talked to several folks about it. I really want to try to figure out how, because I don't want to step on any of the emergency management preparedness toes or anything like that. Everyone has done a wonderful job, but looking and being active up in North Carolina, I just felt compelled to say that I'm hoping our groups are taking note and our officials are taking note. And I hope our citizens are taking note. First and foremost, our citizens need to be prepared to manage a bit by themselves. It's clear that it still takes time to saddle the horses before the cavalry can arrive. And we saw that. But second, I hope that our county government here takes note of the happenings in North Carolina, as well as how those events were perceived. And I say that we've been working with teams of individuals flying, driving, collecting donations hours and days after the storm. And it was interesting and a real learning moment for me of how people were organically migrating to the community churches to find help and find shelter. And many of those churches stepped up as donation collection sites and distribution sites. And it understandably took the state and local government a few days to get up and running. with donation hubs and distribution outreach and things like that, like going to setting up at schools where the government would typically set up. But one of the problems that I observed was that when the government stepped in, they stepped into a functioning and flexible supply chain of outreach and then kind of forced it to redirect and migrate to their emergency plan locations. And it literally started the help process all over again. Clearly, there needs to be government outreach. The hubs were for great 18-wheeler distribution, but the stopping of the churches and the slowing of that process really hindered things and really caused a lot of confusion among the public. And I hope that our emergency management officials the people in charge of an emergency plan will realize that those churches were the boots on the ground in that initial group. And the organic migration coming in, those locals were cutting down trees to get into those churches. And then when the emergency management group got settled up and running and they moved things to the schools, they also had to then recut trees and recut areas and access for people to get into those zones. And it was kind of taking the supplies away from the churches that were already getting those supplies for 3 days ahead or 48 hours ahead. So I hope that in the future we learn to take the church organizations and the emergency management locations such as schools and other government buildings and learn to either integrate those or at least not pull from one to start the other. So that has been an observation, and it's been really weighing on me as we've been trying to make deliveries and things like that. So that was all I had for for commissioner comments. Are there any staff comments?
Yeah, just one thing to remind you guys, this is our only October meeting. This room will be used for early voting, and our next meeting will be November 4th.
I'd like to thank staff for actually reaching out to us and making sure we were okay.
Yes.
Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Nice gesture.
All right. We've got a discussion item regarding the traffic impact study for subdivisions. At the October 1st County Council meeting, Mr. Elliott in District 1 there expressed concern over the traffic impact study on county roads, that section of Chapter 26, specifically Article 1, Section 25-5B. I was not in attendance at the meeting, but looking back at YouTube, which is a great thing, Mr. Elliott's concerns, he expressed observation and concerns that one, this paragraph doesn't specifically say who pays for the traffic study. Two, that it doesn't specifically, that it does not specifically say who selects the engineer. And then three, there seemed to be concerned about the county being stuck with the traffic study bill. In addition to the three listed concerns, Mr. Elliott wanted to expand the traffic study to include new industries' impact on county roads. Mr. Elliott did not specify if this was new industry being built in existing industrial parks or new industry being built on private land. But Mr. Elliott had requested that the ordinance be changed, and it was voted on to send it to us, that it be changed so that the planning department picks an engineer and that the developer or industry pays for it, and that they pay a fee for the work the planning department is doing. So those were the points that he had made. I had a few immediate points, but if somebody wants to start off, yes, sir.
All right, so do we have in front of us an existing ordinance, or is this the revised
This is the
ordinance?
existing ordinance.
Okay, so do we have a draft revised ordinance based on, so do we not need that to have this discussion?
I think where we are right now is a recommendation from the planning commission on whether there is any changes that are required. if there is anything that you would like to add, if there are any modifications to the existing ordinance as it's written to start from. So it was sent to the planning commission for the start.
I'll make a motion. I make a motion that we allow Mr. Root to draft up the proposed changes that were suggested by the council and bring it back to us for discussion and vote. We may or may not like it, but at least it'll be on paper and we can discuss it and decide whether we want to pass it or not.
And I'm not sure that we need to make changes at the moment. But I do have a couple of additional questions for.
Okay, so if somebody seconds my
Second.
motion, then we can discuss whether we even want to consider this action or not.
Anybody want to second that motion?
A second.
I do have a few questions for James before we vote on whether we want Mr. Root to draft something. Specifically, James, looking through that paragraph, it's, a site plan clearly has to be submitted, but I don't see that it says on submitting a site plan that the developer will pay for that survey or site plan. Does a developer typically pay for that survey?
They do,
Has there ever been a situation where they didn't pay for a survey?
not to my knowledge.
So they have to pay for certain things. So going down through here with the traffic study, is it typical that they pay for the traffic study?
As far as I know, everyone always has.
Has it ever happened that we've been stuck with a bill?
Do you know what I mean? I don't know of any time that's happened.
So it's an understood thing that the developer in this case pays for the survey that's done, that's part of this paragraph, and that they pay for the traffic study that's part of this paragraph.
Could I ask a question also?
Yes, sir.
James, I'm just curious, when you're working with someone who's trying to move forward on their plans, and I know there's many stages, but isn't there some kind of check sheet or something that you're involved in? So those items are on that check sheet and they have some understanding that they're gonna pay for a traffic study, is that correct?
The developer's responsible for all the costs associated with development.
Okay. Well, it may not be in the ordinance, but it seems to be in the check sheet. That, so on a practical basis, the process is taking care of it where the county's not getting stuck with the bill.
With the bill. So it seems like that first question of who pays for the traffic study is kind of answered. As far as specifying an engineer, I'd be surprised if it's legal, but I'm not sure it's ethical for the county to pick somebody without going through at least a 3-bid process every time. So I would think the most we could do is say that that the engineering firm would need to have some sort of LLR license behind it to do it. Are there out-of-state
So
engineering firms that do work and make recommendation?
they could. Now typically what we would want to see is on the actual traffic study that there is a South Carolina PE stamp on it. That it is done by an engineer who is licensed in South Carolina. Now you can be licensed in North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, and work in all four.
But they at least can have an LLR, regulated, South Carolina regulated license within that firm.
Yes.
That's doing it. So I would hate for us to try to do something that overrides what the state says is this guy is good for doing this study. I would hate for us to go, no, he's not. We want this other guy. If it's a state regulated thing. So unless somebody disagrees, I don't know that we would want to be selecting an engineer
All right.
for that.
Could you read, I apologize, I don't know if everybody else watched the county council. I actually watched the county council meeting, and I don't remember anything Elliot said about that. I was here, but obviously you wrote it down, but we don't have it in here to look at. So could you read again what he suggested?
It was suggested, it says that it does not specify who the engineer is, and that it was suggested that, and I'm not reading the exact quote, but it was that the planning department should pick the engineer firm that is utilized for that.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I don't know that that's legal or ethical for us to be able to do as a county. And then, let's see, there was one last thing that Mr. Elliott had said that he felt like that the planning department needed to be paid for that subdivision development review. I know we were talking about certain things along that lines. And I don't know where we went with it, but I know a lot of this is, it's what you get paid to do.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, I mean, if I called the tax office and asked them for an adjustment on my taxes and a confusion about a quote, they don't get paid extra because I was talking to them on the phone. They do more than just the preparation of the bill. And so I would assume we do more. Your job, part of your job is to review those things.
We have explicitly subdivision review fees. Our review schedule did change in July with the new budget, so our fees have increased, so that subdivision review is already paid for.
Already paid for? So those seem to be the concerns, and they seem to be being answered. Would you, as staff, want to add to that?
So this is chapter 26, is our roads chapter, which is why we have our roads director here. Is that them?
Nothing for me to add to what y'all have already said. Anything over 10 lots has to have a traffic impact study. Any roads internal need to have a classification as far as what they think the traffic will be on those roads. So all that is generally been not an issue to get that information. We haven't had a lot of concerns about traffic impact studies when they've come in, they've been reviewed. Anything like that, again, it gets paid for by the developer, it gets paid for by somebody, we don't pay for it.
And does it take place every time if there's over 10 homes?
On the county road, yes, sir.
Okay. You had a question, Gary? Mr. Gollin?
Well, I was gonna make a statement that since this has come from the county, I do support the, motion that's on the table. And the reason why is we don't know what we don't know. So I think if we ask Mr. Root just to look at this, and he looks at it and says, I don't think we need to do anything, I think that helps us a lot. So I would be in support of Mr. Nick's motion.
Was the motion that you made to look at it, or was the motion you made to change it?
Nix is not in support of Mr. Nix's motion now, so. Say again?
Was your motion to look at it, for Mr. Root to look at it and give us advice, or was it to make changes to it based on what county was
Now
requesting?
that I've had the discussion, I'm not sure how he would change it that would help a whole lot. I'm just wondering, what was the rationale for coming up with these concerns? Was it driven by something, or was it, I don't understand what Mr. Elliott, what information he's basing his concerns on. Who did he talk to? I mean, we need more information, really. I mean, we don't have enough information to make, if planners and us are saying these aren't gonna do us any good, that we already do what he says, that there's already sufficient information in the rules, then what's the basis for what he was saying? How's that gonna change anything, fix anything?
Do you happen to know? Does anybody?
I certainly wouldn't be comfortable speculating.
Okay.
I have questions. Far as the engineering firm having a South Carolina LLR, where is that rule or law or ordinance at?
That they need to be a traffic, or they need to be a PE to do
Right.
the traffic study.
State law.
Couldn't tell you exactly where it would be found.
I was just curious. The other question is the check sheet that you have. What does it take to change out any items on that check sheet?
It would take a change to chapter, that's in chapter 32, which is our land development ordinances, but you could modify those to remove or add to that.
So everything on that check sheet reference back to
chapter 32 and 38, and
Okay.
then 26 with the traffic impact study and the road alignment.
Okay.
I wasn't sure from the video because I either missed it or it wasn't explicit with regarding industry's impact on the county. If he was talking about industry being built in an existing industrial park or if industry being built on some private land. Is there anything that is affected there with this, whether it's 200 employees coming and going or whether it's shipping coming and going that facilitates a traffic study in regard to his other point?
So generally, inside of the commercial industrial parks, it is handled by the engineer. A lot of times, the engineer that worked on those parks is involved in what the plan is for these businesses, plants coming in to work in, and those are not county roads. Those are not county maintained roads. I mean, if we're told to go they're county owned roads, but they are still private roads. To that extent, so if they wanted to gate them, they could gate them or anything else like that. So for us, there's not much of a review on that. For anything commercial or industrial that would happen on a county road, we would request the traffic impact study.
Okay, so that's something that automatically goes to you then?
Over 10 dwelling units or anything commercial, yeah.
Okay, or anything commercial? Yes, ma'am.
I don't understand, you mentioned the word illegal. If the county kept a list of engineers that a developer could use, because the county has, for whatever reason, likes them, it might prevent maybe some bias in who the developer might choose as an engineer. Maybe it's a more neutral engineer, but would that be illegal
So who
if the county
creates,
keeps his own list?
if the county makes a list, does the
And say,
county
"Pick
not
one
have
of
a
these."
bias then?
Well, maybe, but I would imagine that
That's
they're
where it would
working
be
for,
illegal.
but they're
Or-
working for the county.
But again, is
Interested
it right
taxpayers.
for the government entity to turn around and pick somebody, or is it right to say that this person has a legal license within the state to operate this way? And for us to turn around and say, they might, but we don't like them, doesn't sound like that's quite.
I don't know.
I mean, the bias would exist with the county at that point, rather than the developer. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but to me, yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion that we let our one attendee in the audience speak. He wanted to speak.
I'll second that. All those in favor of letting him speak, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Was there one opposed? Yes, sir.
Thank you. For the record, I'm Tom Markovich. I wasn't sure that I wanted to speak initially because I didn't know where the conversation was going. But I'm very familiar with this ordinance. This evolved out of a settlement in a lawsuit with the county in which I was named. And the Home Builders Association of Oconee County was also a plaintiff. There may be some slight specific things that the language did not include in terms of specifics as to what ended up being in that ordinance. And some of it, actually, there was a total rewrite and a moving of the ordinance back when we moved all the road regs out of 32 and put them in 26. Things got a little jumbled up. So you really would have to pay to go back and look at the original ordinance and how it was. The other thing I would have to do, there is a settlement. I have the original legal papers, and I will go back and look at exactly what was settled on, because that was done through the courts. And I have no intention of making an issue out of any of that, except that this: one, there was never any question that the developer was going to pay for the road studies. And the primary function of the road study, when it talks about classification of the roads, the main classification of the roads at that time was whether or not, basically the amount of daily trips, period. And so that adjusted the road width and some certain other factors. And then we also had to come back, because there were a lot of roads back then that didn't have, the utilities were all over the place. They may or may not have had a right of way. All that was spelled out, every bit of it. the cost didn't really become an issue because this thing is set up with was known as basically a TIF, tax incremental financing. And all the expenses that that developer incurs as a function of upgrading that road or system of roads, because he has to upgrade the whole thing until it gets back to the state road. It may be more than one road. So, anyway, he's responsible for the whole thing. And all of that is reimbursable. So, you know, who pays for it isn't even a factor, because the bottom line is he's gonna pay it, he's gonna get reimbursed for it, period. That's nothing. There's other stuff that's not written in there, and it was supposed to be in there because it doesn't talk about the bonding. The bonding was also included in the actual settlement with the county. Why it didn't make it into the ordinance, I couldn't begin to tell you, but all of that was included in that legal settlement. So, I mean, if we're gonna start changing things, we're gonna change more than just one or two. And I'll pull out the legal settlement if I have to. I don't want to. To be honest, I'm fine with the way this thing is right now. And, you know, it's worked for everybody. Bottom line is, pretty much, there's been almost no development on county roads, here and there, but it's nothing. I mean, most developers are gonna avoid having to do that road upgrade. They're gonna put it on a state road. That's all there is to it. So I don't see where this one goes. And as far as being, you know, a license, they have to be licensed not by LLR, they have to be licensed by DOT. And so DOT sets the standards for all these road studies. The same thing for a state. When we'd have to, and developers have to do road studies for the state too. That all is, those guys have to be licensed by DOT. And whoever's paying for it, they need to be the one who's picking the.
Thank you, Mr. Markovich.
Yeah.
We're going to be, from my understanding, we need to give advice back to the county as to what our recommendation is as the next step. We've got a motion on the table at the moment, and a second. Were you saying you wanted to withdraw your motion, or you want us to vote on your motion?
We can vote.
Okay.
We've already
So
discussed
we've got a motion on the table right now to send this to Mr. Root to redraft, and give us advice on what it should look like. All those in favor of that, raise your hand. All those opposed?
Motion fails.
I'd like to make a motion that we advise council that it is our recommendation that nothing changes within the ordinance.
Second.
We have discussion on that part.
You mentioned reimbursement. Why would the county reimburse the developer on building a road? Is that not the cost of doing business?
No. The reason this lawsuit came about because the county was they were trying to initiate a backdoor impact fee. The whole thing was illegal, and we came to that conclusion amongst the lawyers and everyone else involved. We came up with the solution of saying, look, the issue was, you know, they felt like there was a whole lot of roads that the county was getting stuck paid for, and that the developer wasn't having to pay for these upgrades. The bottom line is, when the houses get built and all of a sudden they start paying taxes, they do pay for those roads. They've always paid for the roads. I mean, the county doesn't just make up money and start spending it. So all the money comes from all the taxpayers. But nonetheless, there used to be, and I'm not sure that it still exists for the counties, it still exists for the cities, but it was called tax incremental financing. And it was a mechanism that was used in order to, when certain things needed to be done, you could get the bonding for it and that's when I'm talking about the bonding on the project. I'm talking about the finance side. I'm not talking about having to the guarantee to the county over. We got to guarantee that road no matter what. So, but on the finance side of things, but basically they take and look at the tax structure for that particular area and the amount of a tax increase over that next 10 years, they get 10% is paid back each year, and they're allowed to accumulate up to the full cost of that. But it can't go below. So if they don't get paid back in the first 10 years, that's it. They lose out. But as long as there's enough growth there and enough people move in and settle on that road, then 10% of that tax increment is going to go back and pay for that development. That's all.
Mr. Markovich, may I ask him a question?
Yes.
So we're back in 26 again, and it brings up a question that I've been concerned about, and that's the 50-foot right-of-way on private roads. Can you elaborate, Ben, as you're here, and it kind of deals with this because it deals with subdivisions?
Yeah, I can. I mean, this was an issue for the county back at the same time that all this was being negotiated during the settlement. And prior to that time, there was no requirement for a private road to have to meet any of the county standards. The county's belief was that if, in some case, they should end up somehow or another that road becomes public and they're responsible for it, they wanted that road to have the same standards that that a county road would have. And so that's where that came from. But I fought it pretty hard, and but my attorneys finally convinced me. They said, look, this is a small thing, just let it go. I don't agree that it's a small thing. Private roads are private, period, as far as I'm concerned. But it did smooth the way a little bit in order to get a settlement on the lawsuit. And so I went along with it. But to be honest, there are so few roads, and the only ones that I know of that have gone from private to public were a couple of roads in some crescent subdivisions. And those roads were primarily, the main reason that they had to be private to begin with was because of the right-of-way. It was because they could not get the number of, there was going to be too much, the lots were going to become, they weren't going to get enough lots to make it work out, is the bottom line. And so they did those. The roads in a lot of crescent subdivisions will go down to a certain point, and when they go out on a finger, because it's out on that finger and they weren't going to be able to get the right-of-ways that they needed for lot size and everything else, that's why all of a sudden the road becomes private. And so, but there are some other subdivisions. I know there were a couple other subdivisions that after the fact, they came back and they went ahead and deeded the right-of-way after the fact. And those became roads, but it's only been 2 or 3, I think, it hasn't been much.
It hasn't been much.
So, anyway, it's really a it's a non-issue, really, to be honest.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have a point of information, or at least some clarification on this. What is it, 7B? About midways of the paragraph. The extent of the study shall be determined by the county engineer on a case-by-case basis. Can you elaborate on what does that mean and how is that determination made?
So, looking at the size of the development, whether or not it needs to have turn lanes looked at, and a lot of that stuff is, or a lot of that information is just through the DOT roadside access manual, the ARMS manual. And most of the subdivisions are like that. We don't have a lot being built on county roads, and a lot of them are pretty small that are along county roads. So it hasn't really risen to that. There's been a few that had the studies done for turn lanes and stuff like that, but none of them required it. So the biggest thing is just the impact to the road, and did it change the classification of the road?
And you're referencing what manual? I'm sorry.
The ARMS manual, the DOT, SCDOT ARMS manual.
Okay.
Do you have any other questions along that line?
Well, I think if that's the this is a vague statement in this ordinance. If we was to do any change to this ordinance, I'd like for it to actually reference that. That way a developer would understand what his guideline is, and it wouldn't, seem like, okay, well, who do I have to talk to or to ensure that my development goes through. I just think if we spell it out, it makes it a lot clearer. I know we got a motion on the floor. What is the motion on the floor?
Motion on the floor is to recommend to council that we not make any change to this as written. Is the motion on the floor. So that I have clarification there, the South Carolina Arms Manual, is that used every time? If I understand what Mr. Haney's asking is, does the developer know going in the door what he's going to be responsible for? Or is there somebody that makes a call on what he's going to be responsible for?
Generally, it's between, we discuss it with the engineer that he picks to do the traffic impact study. They call us asking us what we're looking for because that's the way it's referenced. We tell them we normally go by the arms manual, or we go by the arms manual for traffic impact studies, and they provide us that information back.
Is there a need for you all, from a clarification from past experience, to have that written into this sentence that says based on the SCDOT Arms Manual or anything, something like that?
I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, clarification's not a bad thing. So we've never had an issue with somebody providing us that information, but yeah, no worry, no issue if that was a recommendation from the committee.
It would still need to remain as a case by case though, because every subdivision is gonna be different. It's gonna be 10 or 15 or 300 or 1,000 lots.
So it really is a case-by-case situation, unfortunately?
Yes.
Okay.
So even if they adhere to the manual, arms manual, they would go above and beyond in an understanding of what the true, or what the possible cost would be.
No, but the scope of it, so if you're close to two intersections, right, you're dumping out and you've got an intersection on this side and this side, that would be different than somebody who is 3 miles away from the closest intersection, or if the road is a 35-mile-an-hour through road, or 55-mile-an-hour, or it's a neighborhood road that's at 25 miles an hour. All those things are gonna change what the arms manual is gonna reference. So it's all gonna go by the arms manual, but each one is gonna be scoped for the specific scenario that they are presenting.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying, all that information is in the arms manual.
Yes.
Okay. Far as the layout of the roadways that's involved, they would just have to determine what is applicable to them. Reference an arms manual. Am I understanding that correctly?
I think they should be able to interpret it and see what they're going to be responsible for. Ultimately, it would still be saying you are responsible for it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just,
They should be able to tell. It's not gonna be a surprise, or it should not be a surprise.
For me, a lot of them are small developments, and as James points out, that if the bigger they get, the more accesses they have, and the more conflict points that they may have. That does change the scope of it. Yes, sir.
yeah, but I think it's important to do our due diligence to ensure that the developer understands what measuring stick we're using. And who made the motion?
I had made the motion.
May I do a friendly amendment to your motion?
We might want to remove the motion and make a motion to have David Root figure out where he's going to add that sentence, if that's important.
Okay.
Well, let me just say this. This is a good example of why it is we need Mr. Root to take a look at this. We don't know what we don't know. That's why we have a county attorney. And he can use whatever resources he wants that we may not even be thinking of. He might have some questions that we can't think of, things like that. So I don't think we just need to send something back to the county council saying, oh, change this one thing in number 7B. Seems to me our due diligence is what Mr. Nix initially made a motion for.
So I'll withdraw my motion to present it to council as it is, if you wanted to make a new motion.
I'd like to make a new motion that we modify 7B.
This is just B, the seven, so A is first and it's A 1 through 7.
Okay.
It's gonna be B, sorry, just for the.
Yeah, I was wondering why it was stuck off to the side, not in line. All right, so that's 6B then, right?
It's 26-5B.
Dash 5B.
Would you be able to phrase it in a way that Mr. Root is approving it? Or looking at it as opposed to-
Yes, 26-5B. Let's see, well, this Denton Station. I think past engineering needs to be based off of the South Carolina DOT Arms Manual.
You're saying on a case-by-case basis based around the South Carolina Arms Manual? Or that the engineer,
I'm thinking just remove case-by-case basis, because case-by-case would be determined on how,
and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think y'all both said that it's still a case-by-case based on the exact parameters of that exact location of that subdivision. Is there a traffic light 100 feet down or a traffic light 300 feet down, or a hospital emergency exit at 75 feet away or 200 feet away? And those things might not necessarily be explicitly written in the manual. Is that a correct understanding?
so they're not explicitly written in the manual.
Mr. Chair, could I just say something while we're kind of talking about this? As far as, you could leave the sentence as is and say, with use of the South Carolina DOT Arms Manual for required improvements or required study or whatever. You know, I'm trying to get away from saying something else.
Well, maybe that's where we get Mr. Root involved,
Yeah.
is you make a motion about somehow including the arms manual as the basis of what is being utilized.
Very well said. So I make a motion that Mr. Root looks at this line item and figures out how to include the SCODT Arms Manual so that it reflects that should be the document of reference.
And the SCDOT scopes their own. So they use the arms manual, but they scope their own, each individual. So that is.
All right.
I would be for that, except for, it needs to say, and any other noted improvements. I mean, if he's gonna look at this, we can't, I don't think we just tell him, look at that and nothing else. When the county council has asked us to take a look at the whole thing.
And we did look at the whole thing and voted it down, and now we're looking at this.
One question down here.
2
Yes, sir.
points.
Yes, sir.
County council gave us a list of things to look at. We discussed them and agreed they didn't need to be changed. So now on this piece, the arms manuals, that, the South Carolina Arms Manual, that's not the only thing that they use to make, to do the study, is it? Aren't there other documents?
I'm not sure what the addition, but Tripp.
I mean, if we just say based on that one document, then what else is out there?
It should be covered in the arms manual. I believe it's noted in the arms manual, but there's a trip generation manual for different uses.
If we added that statement in there, are we screwing you guys up?
No, I don't think so.
So the other two manuals that DOT would use would be the traffic signal design guidelines. So if you need to put in a traffic light, here's the design criteria for how a traffic light should be installed, where, how, what, timing, all those kinds of things. And then approved products list for traffic control devices, so that's a reference to METCD, which is the manual for uniform traffic control devices. So there are references to other documents as well, but those will all fit together.
Does a developer tend to know that these are the things, guidelines he's gonna have to follow in doing something like this? I mean, are we, by putting in one, are we cutting things short by not putting in the other two? And then if we didn't put in the other two, is there a new one that we've forgotten? And should we just have it as a generic term? Because developers know it. I think, at least in my mind, the reason to put something in here is so that there's, this is gonna sound bad, but the greasing of the palms, come on, just approve it for me. This would prevent it if a developer knew that in black and white what he had to follow. And maybe I'm completely misunderstanding the whole guideline of it. Yes, sir.
We're having a developer hire an engineer, correct?
Yes.
Is that engineer not going to be aware of all of this stuff? Correct. We're beating a dead horse. The engineer's aware. The engineer's going to go back and say, okay, here's the deal. Because of the parameters of your development, whatever it is, we're going to go by this, and this. And this is what you're going to have to do. Then he can make a decision if that's what he wants to do to go forward or not. That's why he's hiring the engineer.
Exactly.
We don't need to, why are we going through naming all this? They already know this stuff. They already know what they're going to do. And the engineer, why are you paying him? That's what he's supposed to do, to tell the developer what he needs to do.
And if he's licensed in South Carolina, he's gonna know all about the arms manual. And isn't there a traffic impact study, like chapter 6 of the manual or something? It's already in there. So,
It just seems like we're making a redundancy.
Sorry, as it applies to the SCDOT. So just as it applies to SCDOT.
That's a very good statement. It's just, when I read that, it was not clear. You know, it left it open for a lot of interpretation. But I agree with you. If you're hiring, and you have to hire an engineer, so therefore that engineer should be competent and know what resources he needs to pull from. So I withdraw
Withdrawing that motion.
that motion.
I will make a motion then that we send this back to council, having reviewed the points and suggesting of no change.
Second.
We have more discussion in that regard. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed? All right. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?